Are they cheaper? Are they more expensive? Besides all these other advantages that you've mentioned earlier on.
So the short answer is yes, they are expensive, and yes, they are too expensive at the moment. You can...
It's Kaya Bez on Kaya 959 on the street, on the air. My name is Colin Kgari. We're edging towards, the end of the show, and we're closing this segment, talking about electric vehicles. Now, the majority of South African car shoppers are inclined towards owning an electric vehicle. That's an EV, as it's known in the future, according to the 2023 South African Electric Vehicle Buyers Survey. And unsurprisingly, it's the youth, they say. That's, people between the ages of 25 and 35 years, that, would likely buy, an electric vehicle, as opposed to those who are, most likely to be over 65, who are mostly like to be future EV buyers. Now, we want to try and understand this, and we're asking the question, what South Africans really think about electric vehicles. And we have on the line AutoTrader the AutoTrader CEO, that's George Mienie. They commissioned the study. It's called the AutoTrader Special Report, the EV Buyer Survey. And we've invited him to just indulge us and, give us a bit of insights in as far as this concerned. George, it's nice to talk to you. Welcome to Kaya Biz.
Oh, thank you very much, Gugu, and thank you for having me. I think it's my first time on Kaya, actually.
Wonderful. Welcome. It's great to have you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. Firstly, maybe let's just ask this question that we posed at the beginning to say, according to you or to your knowledge, what are South Africans really thinking about electric vehicles? Is it still a foreign concept, if I can put it that way, or is it something that, for instance, it's not in the minds? We know that, for instance, this is where, the global international world is moving with electric vehicles and all that. But what is our take on electric vehicles? Do we even understand what they are?
I think it's getting there. And, the survey shows that there's a growing number of consumers that have driven EVs. In 2022, only 15% of consumers that we had surveyed had driven an EV, whereas in 2023, almost 20% of consumers we surveyed had actually driven an EV. So I think bums in seats is happening more and more and more, and consumers are becoming more aware of electric vehicles than ever before. It doesn't stop, the challenges that we face with the transition to electric vehicles.
But then, does it mean that there's a number, or should I say that, there's more electric vehicles running around on the roads out there? If there is that sense of understanding in terms of, for instance, the market or the South African market, getting to know and understanding electric vehicles.
So, in terms of numbers, we have reached just over 500 new electric vehicle sales in the first half of 2023. That number 500 we did for the entire 12 months of 2022. So there's a more than a doubling effect. There's actually 136% growth in the sale of EVs, and that's exponential. So while the numbers are small, there's only a couple of thousand EVs on the roads compared to 12 million vehicles in South Africa's car park. The numbers are growing at an exponential rate. They're very small still, though.
Okay. And typically, let's understand now the survey, because this is not the first survey that you've commissioned. I think I've seen something with the same headline, dating 2022. This is not the first survey that you've commissioned, is it?
No. So this is, I think this is the fourth survey we've done. The first one was our first go at it, and now we're starting to see the trends, which is encouraging to see.
Okay. What really is the purpose of this survey, George? And I'm asking just so that, for instance, I haven't gone extensively into reading, the outcomes of the survey and all that, but just for the benefit of, our listeners, what is the whole objective or the whole purpose of doing this survey? More so that, the entry of electric vehicles is still at an early stage in the country.
So the purpose of the survey is to understand a couple of things when it comes to the consumer. We have to create structure so that we can create trends, so that we can see where we're going. The first is penetration. How penetrated is the market with EVs? The second thing we're trying to figure out in the survey is what is the perception of the consumer? How does the consumer perceive EVs, driving EVs, range, charging infrastructure, etc.? The third thing is expectations, because it's one thing to perceive something a certain way. It's another thing to expect a certain outcome when you actually buy an EV, because I might perceive an EV to have a range of 400 kilometers, for instance, but I might expect an EV to have a range of 650 kilometers when I actually buy it. So the difference between perception and expectations is important. And the fourth thing is purchase intent. How far out into the future are consumers in South Africa likely to buy an EV? And what are those age categories that you spoke about a little bit earlier on in the intro? And then the fifth element that we try to measure is awareness and trust. Which brands are trusted and which brands are the consumer aware of?
And I guess the little that perhaps we may know about electric vehicles is that they emit reduced carbon. There's less air pollution. There's cheaper running costs and all that, which is what we'll get into in terms of price and the perception that you're talking about and all that. Is it all there is to electric vehicles?
No. So electric vehicles, in my opinion, is really just a simpler technology. I think that's the first point of departure. It's simpler technology. It's better technology. An internal combustion engine vehicle, an ICE vehicle as we call it, contains more than 2,000 moving parts, whereas an electric vehicle contains maybe 10% of that, maybe 200 moving parts, and varies from car to car. So the chances of an electric vehicle breaking is far less. You can see it's almost 90% less if you just take the number of moving parts compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle. And there's very little servicing that needs to go on because there's no oils, there's no lubricants, there's no additives. None of that stuff exists except for in your windscreen wiper fluid and maybe your brake pads, which you don't use very much with regenerative braking.
Let's get into the price issue. I mean, are they cheaper? Are they more expensive? What would you say? Or what would you for the benefit of the listener listening to this now? Because before when we're discussing this topic with my producer, he posed a question to me and say, "Are you likely to buy an electric vehicle?" And I wasn't sure, for instance, what sort of answer I should, and I said, "Aren't they expensive?" What would you say, for instance, in terms of price, are they cheaper? Are they more expensive? Besides all these other advantages that you've mentioned earlier on?
So the short answer is yes, they are expensive, and yes, they are too expensive at the moment. You can't find too many EVs under 1 million rand right now. The Volvo is bringing out the EX30 at the end of the year, which will be 799,000 rand, and you can buy a second-hand i3, which is one of the first battery electric vehicles introduced into the country by BMW. For just over 450 to 500,000 rand now second hand. So they are not cheap. And that's one of the adoption trinity problems that we've been consistent at reporting in the EV buyer survey over the last couple of years now, is the initial cost of an EV is one of the biggest barriers to adoption in South Africa, because it's almost like the EV at the moment is for the elite and for the people that are at the upper end of the income scale. And we've got to bring that down. And there's ways to do that. We're just perhaps not moving fast enough.
George, let's talk about the what I would call the obvious, perceptions around, issues of, lack of charging infrastructure, issues of load shedding and all that, because these are the questions that, for instance, people just loosely ask. And, sometimes it's not out of ignorance, but it's just trying to be realistic about understanding, what are the challenges that would actually, come with, having an EV car as opposed to just showing up the advantages.
So that Colin, the challenges in the perception of the consumer based on the EV buyer survey, or let's pose them as disadvantages. The first is cost. We mentioned cost as a big factor. The next one that's the most important, 58% of consumers mentioned, is charging time. It takes longer to charge an EV than it does to fill up an internal combustion engine vehicle. Consumers view this as quite a big negative, and it's less than a negative as opposed to an education problem, because I drive a full battery electric vehicle, and I use maybe 20% of my battery on a daily basis if I commute to my office and back, which means that I can plug my car in my garage, leave it overnight. By the time the morning comes, it's fully charged. It takes approximately 2 hours to fill that 20% of the battery. So that perception of a charge time problem is really more of an education issue. And you mentioned no charging infrastructure. There is charging infrastructure. There's actually more chargers per EV in South Africa than there is in Europe. There's more than 300 public chargers out there on our main motorways. You won't drive more than 150 to 200 kilometers down to Cape Town without coming across an EV DC fast charger. So all of these disadvantages that consumers are raising tell us as AutoTrader that this is an education issue more than it is a real issue. Load shedding is an example, because I'm pretty sure that the listeners are thinking to themselves, how can you drive an electric vehicle when we have load shedding? As I said earlier on, when I plug my car in at night, I charge it for about 2, maybe maximum 3 hours. And there's no load shedding schedule that lasts for 12 hours. Well, not yet anyway, but there's no load shedding schedule that lasts for 12 hours. So you do get a 3-hour charge at least during the course of a night.
Your study concludes that EV ownership inclination diminished by 3% in 2023, and that in addition, the number of consumers unlikely to consider purchasing an EV in the future has risen to 17% from 13% a year ago. That, I quote from your study. What do you make of this? I mean, this apathy, perhaps, like for instance, the less interest in that we see in these numbers that you quote here.
So we think the reason for the reduction in numbers or appetite is because of hybrid vehicles. And we started to see this when Toyota launched the Toyota Cross at the end of last year. Hybrid vehicles are a middle step to full battery electric. They cost a lot less. I mean, the Toyota Cross you can get for under 500,000 Rand, which is the sweet spot that we believe will cause the beginning of mass adoption. And so we think that the soft hybrid or the non-plug-in hybrid is the middle step to consumers going to full battery electric, and the reason why that number has gone backwards.
George, as we close, and we appreciate your insight into this. I mean, there's another aspect to this. In fact, I read a report, if not a week ago, where one of the leading manufacturers in the country decried the fact that we still don't have an EV policy from government. Am I quoting right? And what is this likely to do? Because they seem to suggest that because of this lack of EV policy in the country, we are kind of like being left behind, or sort of like losing out in terms of being able to explore this market like the other markets internationally.
That is spot on, Colin. So we as a country we produced a green paper back when COVID was a thing, and that green paper was supposed to turn into a white paper. Government is discussing the white paper at the moment, but it remains to be seen when that white paper will actually hit the airwaves and regulation will come to pass. That does a couple of things. The first thing it needs to do is incentivize consumers to drive EVs. And the second thing it needs to do is incentivize manufacturers to put EVs on the road, and in also doing, bring down the cost of EV to the end consumer. So that white paper is vital. Without regulation, this is going to be a big hurdle to cross.
Let's end it here, George. Very insightful. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us on Kaya Biz tonight.
Thank you.
Wonderful. That's George Mienie, Chief Executive Officer of AutoTrader, talking to us about their survey, the 2023 survey that they've done on electric vehicles. And that's where we ended. My name is Colin Kgari. I was in for